The night is still, the air thick with tension. Elijah Carter, a young black boy, walks alongside his loyal dog, Shadow. The small town that should have been home is filled with rejection, hate, and doors slammed in his face. They can't understand why he's fighting to stay, why he won't just leave. But Elijah's resolve is stronger than their hatred. And Shadow, his only companion, is there with him through it all. Under the weight of the world's cruelty, Elijah is pushed to the brink, until a single moment changes everything, turning his fight for justice into something none of them expected. What happens when a boy who's been taught to disappear finally dares to stand and be seen? The town of Millstone, Georgia, was asleep under the thick veil of midnight fog. The streets were empty, except for the distant howl of a stray dog and the creak of an old weather vane twisting in the wind. The darkness provided cover, but for Jerry Carter, it also meant uncertainty. "Stay close, boy," Jerry whispered, gripping the worn-out leash of his only friend, Duke, a scrappy, golden-furred mutt with eyes full of loyalty. The dog's ears twitched, sensing the tension in the air. Behind them, the Carter family's old wooden house stood in eerie silence. Jerry's father had always told him, "A man's home is his fortress." But tonight, that fortress had been breached. Just an hour ago, Jerry had been jolted awake by the sound of shattering glass. His mother's terrified screams filled the air, followed by his father's firm voice. "Run, Jerry. Take Duke and run." And so they ran. Jerry's bare feet barely made a sound against the dirt road as he ducked behind an abandoned wagon near Wilkins' general store. He risked a glance back, no movement yet, but he knew better than to assume he was safe. Sheriff Tom Wilkins was a man who never let go of a chase, especially when it involved a black boy he believed had no place in this town. Duke let out a low growl. Jerry stiffened. Then a gunshot. It wasn't close, but it was enough to send a surge of panic through him. He pulled Duke closer, whispering, "We gotta go, boy. We gotta keep moving." They crept toward the old churchyard where Reverend Samuel Bryant had once told him, "If you ever need sanctuary, my doors are always open." But sanctuary felt like a distant dream when the night itself seemed to be working against him. Then came the voices. "You see him?" a man asked in a hushed but urgent tone. "Nah, but he couldn't have gone far. Sheriff Wilkins wants him found before dawn," another answered. Jerry's heart pounded. His father's words echoed in his mind. "Never let fear control you, son. Be smart, be fast." Holding Duke close, Jerry took a deep breath and vanished into the night. Jerry ran until his legs ached, until his breath came in ragged gasps, until the world around him blurred into an endless stretch of darkness. Duke stayed by his side, his golden fur barely visible under the dim moonlight. Finally, they reached the old oak grove near the outskirts of town. The towering trees stood like silent sentinels, their twisted branches reaching toward the sky. Jerry collapsed onto the damp ground, pressing his forehead against Duke's. "You okay, boy?" he whispered. Duke licked his cheek, his warm breath steady and reassuring. He didn't need to speak, his presence alone was enough. Jerry let out a shaky breath. The night's events replayed in his mind, the gunshot, his mother's screams, his father's desperate command. He clenched his fists. He had no idea what had happened to them. Were they safe? Had they escaped? Or, no, he couldn't think like that. Duke whined softly, as if sensing Jerry's turmoil. "You're all I got now," Jerry murmured. "Guess that makes us a team, huh?" The wind rustled through the leaves, carrying with it distant voices. Jerry's body went rigid. He grabbed Duke's collar and pulled him close. "Keep quiet, boy," he whispered. A group of men moved along the dirt road nearby, their lanterns swinging. Sheriff Wilkins' men. Jerry pressed his back against the rough bark of the oak tree, barely daring to breathe. The voices grew louder. "Kid's got nowhere to go. He'll slip up sooner or later." Sheriff Wilkins' voice cut through the night. "We find that mutt, we find the boy. Ain't a stray in this town that don't stick to its master." Jerry felt Duke's body tense. His dog was smart, too smart. If they ran now, the men would hear. If they stayed, it was only a matter of time before someone spotted them. His father's words echoed in his mind. "A man who don't think before he moves is a dead man." Jerry swallowed hard, forcing himself to think. Then he saw it, the riverbank, just beyond the trees. The water was low this time of year, but if they could make it across, the rocky ledges on the other side would give them cover. Jerry leaned down, pressing his forehead against Duke's. "You trust me, boy?" Duke's tail wagged slightly, his golden eyes locked onto Jerry's. "All right," Jerry whispered. "Then let's go." Without another word, he bolted toward the river, Duke right on his heels. The voices behind him grew frantic. They'd been spotted. "There!" someone shouted. Gunfire rang out. Jerry's heart pounded as he dove into the freezing water, pulling Duke with him. The river wasn't deep, but the current was strong. The cold bit into his skin, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. He reached the far bank, scrambling onto the rocks. Duke shook himself off, letting out a low growl. Jerry didn't look back. He just ran. Jerry Carter had always known Willow Creek wasn't kind to people like him. It was the kind of town where the color of your skin determined your worth. Where the grocery store owner would watch you like a hawk, even if you had money to pay. Where some sidewalks weren't meant for people like him to walk on. And where Sheriff Wilkins, a man who'd worn the badge for far too long, made sure everyone knew exactly who belonged and who didn't. Jerry had seen it all growing up. He'd watched his father, Isaiah Carter, a man of quiet strength, swallow his pride every time a white man spoke down to him. He'd seen his mother, Evelyn, forced to do twice the work for half the pay at the local diner. And he'd learned, sometimes the hard way, that the wrong word, the wrong look, could get a black boy in trouble faster than he could blink. Now he was running through the same streets that had never welcomed him, hiding from the very people who had made his family's life unbearable. Duke trotted beside him, his fur still damp from the river. Jerry kept to the shadows, slipping through alleys, moving fast but careful. He had to find someone who could help. But who? Willow Creek wasn't a place full of friendly faces. The town was built on blood, stolen land, stolen labor, stolen lives. The railroad had brought prosperity, but not for everyone. The old plantation houses still stood, their grandeur a mockery of the suffering that had built them. The names on the buildings, Wilkins, Thatcher, Montgomery, belonged to the same families that had run the town for generations. And the people, they still whispered. They still looked away. They still obeyed. Jerry gritted his teeth. His father had once told him, "Son, the world ain't fair, but you don't stop fighting just because the deck is stacked against you." Right now, that felt like a cruel joke. Up ahead, the old chapel loomed in the dark. It was the one place in town that had ever felt safe. Pastor Green had always been kind to Jerry's family, even when others weren't. If there was anyone who might help, it was him. Jerry picked up his pace, Duke keeping stride beside him. But as they reached the chapel steps, a shadow moved. Jerry froze. A man stepped into the dim lantern light. Tommy Thatcher. Jerry's stomach dropped. Tommy was Sheriff Wilkins' right-hand man, mean as a rattlesnake and just as dangerous. He wasn't wearing his deputy badge tonight. This wasn't official business. This was something worse. "Well, well," Tommy drawled, his fingers resting on the revolver at his hip. "Looks like I found myself a lost little dog." Jerry swallowed hard, his mind racing. He had nowhere left to run. Jerry's heart pounded. His fingers twitched at his sides, but he forced himself to stay still. Duke let out a low growl beside him, his golden fur bristling. Tommy Thatcher smirked, tipping his hat back. "Looks like you're lost, boy." Jerry clenched his jaw. He knew better than to talk back. But standing there, in front of the chapel, his last hope, he also knew running wasn't an option anymore. "I ain't lost," Jerry said, his voice even. "Just passing through." Tommy chuckled, the kind of laugh that sent a chill down a man's spine. "That right? 'Cause it sure looks to me like you're sneaking around. And you know how folks around here feel about sneaky types." Jerry swallowed hard. His father's warnings echoed in his head. "Never give them a reason, son. They don't need much of one." Tommy took a slow step forward, his boots crunching against the dirt road. "Tell me something, Carter. Why's your mutt growling at me like that? Like he don't know his place?" Duke's growl deepened. The dog wasn't stupid. He could sense the danger as much as Jerry could. Before Jerry could respond, the chapel door creaked open. A warm glow spilled out, casting a tall shadow against the wooden steps. Pastor Green. The old man took a step forward, his eyes locking onto Tommy with quiet authority. "Evening, Mr. Thatcher," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Everything all right here?" Tommy hesitated. A church was a church, even in Willow Creek. Beating a boy in the streets was one thing. Doing it in front of a pastor? That was another. Tommy let out a breath, then spit into the dirt. "Just checking in on a lost soul, Pastor." His eyes flicked back to Jerry. "Best you keep walking, boy." Jerry didn't move. Pastor Green placed a hand on his shoulder. "He's staying here tonight." Silence stretched between them. Tommy's jaw tensed, but he didn't argue. Instead, he flashed Jerry a look, one that made it clear this wasn't over. Then he turned, disappearing into the darkness. Jerry exhaled, his whole body trembling from the tension. Pastor Green gave his shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "Come inside, son. We've got work to do." Jerry followed him into the chapel, Duke at his heels. But even in the safety of those old wooden walls, he knew the trouble was only beginning. Jerry sat on the wooden bench inside the chapel, hands clenched together. The dim candlelight flickered against the stained glass windows, casting eerie shadows across the room. Duke lay beside him, head resting on Jerry's foot, his steady breathing the only thing keeping Jerry grounded. Pastor Green sat across from him, eyes filled with understanding. "You're safe here, son," he said gently. Jerry nodded, but deep down he knew the truth. Nowhere was truly safe. The silence stretched between them until the old pastor spoke again. "Folks around here, they don't take kindly to change. And they certainly don't take kindly to people who don't know their place." Jerry looked up, his jaw tight. "I know my place, sir. I just don't think it's right." Pastor Green sighed. "Neither do I, son. But right and safe ain't always the same thing." Jerry didn't reply. He knew Pastor Green was trying to help, but words didn't change the fact that Tommy Thatcher and his kind wouldn't let this go. Suddenly, Duke's ears perked up. A low growl rumbled in his throat. Jerry stiffened. "What is it, boy?" Duke's gaze locked onto the door. Then bang! A rock slammed against the wooden door, rattling it on its hinges. Jerry jumped to his feet. Pastor Green stood quickly, his expression dark. "Stay here," he instructed, moving toward the door. Duke wouldn't stay put. He followed, muscles tensed. Pastor Green opened the door just a crack. Outside, the night stretched dark and silent, but Jerry wasn't fooled. Another rock whizzed past, striking the chapel's outer wall. Laughter rang out in the distance. "Tommy!" Jerry clenched his fists. He could feel his pulse pounding in his ears. "They want you to come out," Pastor Green murmured. "Don't give them what they want." Jerry swallowed hard. He wasn't scared for himself, he was scared for Duke. "Come on out, Carter," Tommy's voice taunted from the darkness. "Or you gonna let the preacher fight your battles for you?" Duke barked, pulling at his collar. His instincts told him to protect, to fight. Jerry took a step forward, but Pastor Green grabbed his arm. "Not like this, son. They're looking for a reason." Jerry gritted his teeth. Every muscle in his body screamed for him to stand his ground. But Pastor Green was right. If he stepped outside now, he'd be playing into Tommy's hands. Another rock flew, but this time, it wasn't aimed at the door. It struck Duke. The dog yelped, stumbling back. Jerry saw red. Before he could think, he was at the door, his hand on the knob. Pastor Green's grip tightened. "I know it hurts, son, but you walk out there now and they win." Jerry's breath came fast and shallow. He looked down at Duke, who had already shaken off the hit, standing tall, unwavering. Loyal. Jerry exhaled. Slowly, he let go of the door. Outside, Tommy's laughter faded as he realized his game wasn't working. "Coward!" Tommy spat, but Jerry didn't react. Pastor Green shut the door. "You did good, son." Jerry didn't feel good. He felt like a coward. But as Duke leaned against him, Jerry knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't run forever. This wasn't over. The air in town was different the next morning. Heavier. Tense. As Jerry Carter walked down the dirt road with Duke at his side, he felt the weight of eyes watching him from behind curtains and storefront windows. He wasn't welcome here. He had never been. Duke trotted close, his ears flicking at every distant sound. He sensed it too, something was coming. As they turned the corner near the general store, Jerry saw them. Tommy Thatcher and his gang. 5 boys, leaning against the wooden railing, blocking the entrance. Tommy, tall and broad for 16, had that same smug grin. His cronies, Wade, Pete, and the Carter twins, Sam and Levi, watched silently. The twins weren't related to Jerry, but in a town this small, names didn't matter. Loyalties did. Jerry slowed his steps. Duke let out a low growl. "Well, look who finally decided to show his face," Tommy drawled, pushing off the railing. "Thought you'd be halfway to another town by now." Jerry met his eyes. "Not running." Tommy chuckled. "That's so." He kicked at the dirt. "See, me and the boys, we were talking. After last night, we figured maybe you didn't get the message. Maybe you need a clearer one." Jerry's fists clenched, but he forced himself to stay still. Tommy turned his gaze to Duke. "Ain't right, a mutt like that living better than some folks around here." Jerry stepped forward. "You leave him out of this." But Tommy just smirked. "Nah, I don't think I will. It happened fast. Too fast." Tommy whistled, and before Jerry could react, Pete yanked a long metal rod from behind the railing and swung it at Duke. The crack of metal hitting flesh was sharp and sickening. Duke yelped and stumbled, his back leg buckling. Jerry's vision blurred with rage. He lunged, shoving Pete so hard he crashed into a stack of crates. But before Jerry could do more, Tommy drove a fist into his stomach. Jerry doubled over, gasping for air. The world tilted as another punch landed against his ribs. Hands grabbed his shirt, shoving him backward. He hit the ground hard, gravel biting into his palms. Duke, hurt but still standing, bared his teeth, barking wildly. "Call off your dog," Tommy sneered, wiping his knuckles. "Or we'll put him down for good." Jerry struggled to breathe. His entire body burned, but he pushed himself up onto his elbows. Duke was limping, but his spirit was unshaken. Jerry's voice was raw. "You touch him again, and I swear." Tommy laughed, but there was something uneasy in his eyes. He glanced at his gang, then back at Jerry. "You're real stupid, Carter. You think you can fight us all?" Jerry wiped blood from his lip. "I don't need to fight you. The whole town saw what you just did." A flicker of doubt crossed Tommy's face. Then from behind him, a voice. Steady. Commanding. "That's enough. Sheriff Turner." The old sheriff stood in the street, hand resting on his holster. His gaze swept over the scene. Jerry on the ground, Duke trembling but standing, Tommy and his gang frozen in place. Tommy straightened. "Sheriff, I saw what happened." The sheriff's voice was calm but firm. "All of it." The gang exchanged uneasy glances. Pete, still on the ground, wiped his hands on his shirt. Sheriff Turner sighed. "You boys best be getting home before I decide to make this my problem." Tommy clenched his jaw but didn't argue. "Let's go," he muttered. One by one, his gang followed, disappearing into the alley. The sheriff turned to Jerry, his gaze unreadable. "You all right, son?" Jerry nodded, though his ribs screamed otherwise. "I'll live." The sheriff knelt beside Duke, examining the dog's injury. "He needs a vet." "I know," Jerry murmured. Sheriff Turner stood. "This town ain't fair, Carter. But you already knew that." He hesitated. "You ever need a witness, you come find me." Jerry looked up, surprised. He expected indifference. "Not this." The sheriff tipped his hat. "Go on now. Get that dog taken care of." Jerry swallowed hard and nodded. With slow, careful movements, he helped Duke to his feet. The dog leaned against him, his trust unwavering. As they walked away, Jerry knew one thing. This wasn't over. Tommy had made his move. And now, Jerry had no choice but to make his. The wind howled through the narrow streets of Mason Hollow, carrying dust and tension in equal measure. The town had always been uneasy, but after the attack on Duke, something had shifted. Jerry Carter felt it with every step he took. People didn't meet his eyes. Conversations stopped when he passed. He wasn't just an outsider anymore. He was a problem. Duke walked beside him, limping but determined. The vet had done what he could, but the bruises would take time to heal. Just like everything else. At home, Jerry sat on the wooden steps of the old farmhouse, staring at the horizon. His knuckles were still raw from where they had hit Pete's jaw. He had never been the kind to throw the first punch, but last night had changed something. Behind him, the screen door creaked open. His uncle, Earl Carter, stepped out, a pipe in his hand. Earl wasn't a man of many words, but when he spoke, people listened. "You're lucky the sheriff showed up when he did," Earl said, lighting his pipe. "Thatcher boy would have done worse." Jerry didn't respond. Earl exhaled, the smoke curling into the wind. "This ain't the first time that gangs hurt someone. And it won't be the last." Jerry glanced at Duke, who had settled beside him, head resting on his paws. "They won't stop unless someone makes them." Earl let out a dry chuckle. "You think that's your job?" Jerry met his uncle's gaze. "If it ain't mine, then whose?" Earl studied him for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket, pulling out something small. He tossed it to Jerry, who caught it instinctively. A pocket knife. Old, worn, but well cared for. "That belonged to your father," Earl said quietly. "He always carried it, not because he needed a weapon, but because he believed a man should always be prepared." Jerry turned the knife in his hands. His father had died years ago, lost to the same cruelty that plagued this town. He had been a good man, and it hadn't saved him. Earl tapped the ashes from his pipe. "There's a storm coming, boy. You can feel it, can't you?" Jerry nodded. "Then you best be ready." Later that night, Jerry sat by the oil lamp, sharpening the pocket knife against a whetstone. The rhythmic scrape filled the silence. Duke lay by the fire, his eyes half closed but alert. A knock at the door shattered the quiet. Jerry tensed. It was late. Too late for visitors. Earl stood, grabbing his rifle from the corner. "Stay here." But Jerry was already moving. He cracked the door open, just enough to see outside. The flickering lantern on the porch cast long shadows, but he recognized the figure immediately. Sheriff Turner. His expression was unreadable, but his tone was firm. "We need to talk." Jerry stepped outside, shutting the door behind him. "What is it?" The sheriff hesitated. "Tommy Thatcher's stirring up trouble. More than usual." Jerry's stomach tightened. "What kind of trouble?" Sheriff Turner glanced around, lowering his voice. "Word is his father, Clive Thatcher, ain't happy about what happened. He thinks you made his son look weak." Jerry exhaled sharply. Clive Thatcher owned half the businesses in town. He wasn't just a bully, he was dangerous. Turner shifted his weight. "I'm telling you this, 'cause I know you're stubborn. But listen to me, Carter. This ain't a fight you can win on your own." Jerry clenched his jaw. "So what do you suggest?" Turner sighed. "Lay low. Keep your head down. Maybe let this blow over." Jerry shook his head. "That ain't gonna happen." Turner rubbed his temple. "I figured you'd say that." A gust of wind rattled the porch railing. The sheriff straightened. "Just be careful, Jerry." He turned to leave but paused. "And keep that dog close. Something tells me he's gonna be your only real friend in this." As Turner walked off into the night, Jerry looked down at Duke, who stared back at him with quiet understanding. The storm was coming, and he wasn't running. The tension in Mason Hollow had finally reached its breaking point. The town had always been run by men like Clive Thatcher, powerful, ruthless, and convinced that fear was the best way to keep control. But fear only worked as long as people allowed it, and Jerry Carter had decided he wouldn't allow it anymore. The morning after Sheriff Turner's warning, Jerry stood on the porch, staring at the barn where Duke rested. The bruises on the dog's body had faded, but the fire in his eyes remained. It was the same fire Jerry felt burning in his chest. Earl Carter watched him from the doorway. "You're thinking about doing something stupid, ain't you?" Jerry didn't look away. "Depends on what you call stupid." Earl let out a slow sigh. "You can't fight them all, boy. The Thatchers own this town." Jerry turned to face his uncle. "They own the businesses. They own the sheriff's office. But they don't own me." Earl studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded, stepping back inside. When he returned, he was holding something wrapped in cloth. He placed it in Jerry's hands. Jerry unwrapped it carefully. A revolver, old but well-maintained. "Your daddy's," Earl said. "I was hoping you'd never need it." Jerry swallowed hard. "I don't plan on shooting anybody." Earl met his gaze. "Then you better learn how to make them think you might." A reckoning in the town square. By noon, Jerry was walking straight into town. He knew exactly where he was going. The Iron Spur Saloon, Clive Thatcher's favorite place to hold court. People on the street whispered as he passed. Some watched in silence, others turned away. Everyone knew this was trouble. Inside, the saloon was thick with the smell of whiskey and sweat. Clive Thatcher sat at his usual table, flanked by his son Tommy and a couple of his men. They laughed, drank, and acted as if the town belonged to them. Jerry stepped through the door, Duke at his side. The room went quiet. Tommy was the first to react. He pushed back his chair, standing up with a smirk. "Well, well, if it ain't the hero." Jerry's voice was steady. "You and your boys beat my dog nearly to death. Then you came after me." He took another step forward. "That was a mistake." Tommy laughed, looking around at the crowd. "You hear that? The Carter boy thinks he's got guts." Jerry's fingers brushed against the pocket knife in his coat. He kept his voice low, calm. "I ain't here to threaten. I'm here to tell you, I'm done running." Clive Thatcher finally spoke, his voice smooth as silk but laced with danger. "Son, you think you're special? I've seen men like you before. Brave, foolish. You know where they are now." He leaned forward. "Buried." Jerry didn't flinch. "Then I guess you better start digging." A tense silence followed. The men at Clive's table shifted, hands near their belts. Duke let out a low growl. Clive exhaled, shaking his head. "You should listen to your uncle, boy. Walk away while you still can." Jerry stood firm. "You don't scare me, Thatcher." The old man's eyes narrowed. Then, after a long pause, he chuckled. "Maybe not, but you should be scared of what comes next." Jerry met his gaze, unblinking. "We'll see about that." He turned and walked out, Duke trotting beside him. The town was watching. They had always been watching. But for the first time, Jerry wasn't just another man trying to survive. He was fighting back, and Mason Hollow would never be the same again. The night was unusually quiet in Mason Hollow. A storm brewed on the horizon, but the real tempest was about to hit the town square. Jerry Carter knew this moment was coming. Since his confrontation with Clive Thatcher, there had been whispers, some of admiration, others of fear. No one had ever stood up to the Thatchers and walked away unscathed. Jerry knew they wouldn't let him get away with it. And they didn't. A shadow in the night. It happened when Jerry was walking home from the general store, Duke trotting at his side. The streetlights flickered as a gust of wind swept through town, kicking up dust. That's when he heard it, footsteps behind him. Jerry's grip tightened around the sack of supplies in his hand. His uncle had warned him about this. They won't come for you in daylight, boy. They'll wait until you're alone. He stopped in his tracks. Duke let out a low, warning growl. Turn around, Carter. The voice was unmistakable. Tommy Thatcher. Jerry turned slowly. There they were, 3 figures emerging from the shadows. Tommy stood in the middle, his usual cocky smirk replaced by something colder, deadlier. To his left and right were 2 men, bruisers that Jerry recognized as Clive Thatcher's enforcers. Jerry's heartbeat steadied. He knew this wasn't going to be a fair fight. Out a little late, ain't you, Tommy? Jerry asked, his voice calm. Tommy's smirk returned. I was about to ask you the same thing. The tension in the air was thick. The 2 men flanking Tommy cracked their knuckles. You made my old man real mad the other day, Tommy continued. Nobody talks to him like that. Jerry didn't respond. He shifted his stance slightly, keeping Duke close. Tommy took a slow step forward. See my pa, he don't like being embarrassed. And now, I gotta clean up the mess you made. Jerry exhaled through his nose. That's funny, Tommy. 'Cause from where I'm standing, you look more scared than mad. Tommy's eyes flashed with anger. Then he lunged. A fight in the streets. Jerry barely had time to react before Tommy swung. He ducked, feeling the punch graze past his ear. Before Tommy could recover, Jerry drove his shoulder into his gut, knocking him back. One of the enforcers grabbed Jerry from behind. He struggled, twisting his body, but the man was built like an ox. The other thug raised a fist. And Duke struck. The dog lunged, teeth sinking into the man's forearm. He screamed, trying to shake Duke off, but the dog held firm. Jerry took his chance. He stomped on the foot of the man holding him, then slammed his elbow into his ribs. The grip loosened just enough for Jerry to break free. Tommy, red-faced with rage, pulled a knife from his belt. That's enough. The voice cut through the chaos like a gunshot. Sheriff Turner. The old lawman stood at the edge of the street, one hand on his holstered revolver. Townsfolk had gathered, drawn by the commotion. Some peered from windows, others stood in doorways, watching in tense silence. Jerry, breathing heavily, stepped back, keeping Duke close. Sheriff Turner eyed Tommy, then the 2 beaten enforcers. Finally, he looked at Jerry. Go home, Carter, he said. Jerry didn't move. You gonna arrest them? Turner's jaw tightened. He glanced at Tommy, who was still gripping his knife. Then slowly he shook his head. Jerry let out a bitter laugh. That's what I thought. Tommy wiped blood from his lip. This ain't over, Carter. Jerry met his gaze. I know. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, Duke by his side. As he disappeared into the night, the people of Mason Hollow whispered among themselves. Something had changed. For the first time in years, the Thatchers weren't the only ones people feared. And that terrified them. The air in Mason Hollow felt different. People whispered in hushed tones, glancing over their shoulders as if the town itself held its breath. The fight between Jerry Carter and Tommy Thatcher had shaken things up, but the real battle was just beginning. The courtroom showdown. A week later, the town courthouse was packed. Word had spread fast. The Carters were taking the Thatchers to court. Jerry sat beside his uncle, Elijah, both dressed in their Sunday best. Across the room, Clive Thatcher loomed over his son, Tommy, who sported a bruised jaw and a bandaged arm. Sheriff Turner sat near the front, his expression unreadable. The judge, an older man with tired eyes, cleared his throat. Let's keep this brief. Elijah stood, his voice steady. Your Honor, for years, the Thatchers have ruled this town through fear. They've hurt people, taken what they wanted, and never faced consequences. But last week, they went too far. Tommy and his men attacked my nephew in cold blood. Clive Thatcher let out a low chuckle. Boys roughhouse all the time. Ain't that right, Tommy? Tommy smirked. Jerry clenched his fists. Elijah didn't flinch. We're not asking for favors. We're asking for justice. The judge turned to Clive. What do you have to say? Clive leaned forward, his voice smooth like oil. My boy was defending his family's name, Your Honor. That Carter kid's been stirring up trouble. We all know it. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Some nodded in agreement, others frowned. Then Jerry stood up. His voice was quiet but firm. I didn't pick this fight, but I won't run from it either. He looked Clive in the eye. I may not have your money, but I have something you don't, the truth. The judge studied Jerry for a long moment before speaking. The law exists to protect the people, not to serve those with the deepest pockets. Clive Thatcher, your men acted unlawfully. Tommy, you'll pay a fine for assault. And from this day forward, I expect the law to be followed by all. A hush fell over the room. For the first time, the Thatchers had lost. Beyond the verdict, as the Carters stepped outside, the townsfolk gathered. Some tipped their hats, others simply nodded. It wasn't much, but it was the beginning of change. Elijah placed a hand on Jerry's shoulder. You did good, boy. Jerry looked around, his heart pounding. It's not over, is it? Elijah sighed. No, but it's a start. From across the street, Clive Thatcher stood watching, his jaw clenched. He wasn't done yet, but neither was Jerry Carter. As the dust settled and the echoes of gunfire faded, the town of Hollow Creek was left with an undeniable truth. Justice was not merely about the law. It was about doing what was right, even when the world stood against you. Jerry Carter had faced hatred, fear, and cruelty. He had seen the worst of humanity, but he had also seen its best, in Elijah, in the few brave townspeople who dared to stand up, and most of all, in himself. He had fought not just for his dignity, but for something larger than himself. And that fight had left a mark on Hollow Creek that would never fade. The courtroom had been silent when the verdict was read. Sheriff Turner, his face a mask of defeat, was led away in handcuffs. Clive Thatcher, the man who once held the town in an iron grip of fear, sat slumped in his chair, knowing his reign of terror was over. Tommy Thatcher, his son, stared at Jerry with something unfamiliar in his eyes. Perhaps regret, perhaps shame. Outside, the people of Hollow Creek had gathered, their faces uncertain. They had watched this boy, this outsider, fight for what was right when none of them had the courage to. And now, as Jerry stepped onto the courthouse steps, Elijah by his side, a hush fell over the crowd. Then one voice rang out, an old man, tipping his hat. You're a better man than most of us, boy. A moment later, another voice. Then another. And suddenly the crowd was clapping. Not everyone, but enough. Enough to show that the tides had shifted. Jerry looked up at Elijah, who nodded. It wasn't about winning the fight. It was about changing the hearts of those who watched. The world is filled with injustice. There will always be those who believe they can take what they want, hurt who they please, and silence those who refuse to bow. But history does not remember cowards, it remembers the brave. Jerry didn't set out to be a hero. He didn't ask for a battle. But when the moment came, he chose to stand. And that made all the difference. Elijah once told him, a man's worth ain't in how hard he fights, but in what he fights for. That's the lesson Hollow Creek learned that day. And maybe, just maybe, it's a lesson we all need to remember. In a world where standing up for what's right often comes at a cost, Jerry chose to fight despite the odds stacked against him. If you were in his shoes, facing injustice, fear, and overwhelming power, would you have done the same? Or do you think there are times when walking away is the wiser choice? Share your thoughts in the comments, and let's start a conversation about courage, justice, and what it truly means to stand up for what's right.